Hello, my dear friends. It's Daniel Karapkin here. Some words of Torah for Parshat Miketz, Chanukah, and Rosh Chodesh. We all make mistakes, and hopefully we own up to them. But no one likes the person who, after we mess up, tells us, "I told you so." One gets that feeling when reading an exchange from our portion. Yosef pretends to be a stranger to his brothers. He accuses them of being spies, and then tells them to bring their youngest brother to Egypt to see if they're telling the truth. He'll keep one of the brothers prisoner until they return with Binyamin. The Torah then narrates how the brothers turned to each other and said, "Aval ashemim anachnu al achinu." In truth, we are guilty over our brother, in that we saw his pain when he begged us for mercy, and we refused to listen. This is why this tragedy has befallen us. But this admission of guilt is not enough for Reuven. No. Immediately after they admit that they have sinned, Reuven turns to his brothers and said, "Halo amarti alechem lemor al techetu vayeled velo shematem." Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? You didn't listen, and now his blood is being demanded of us. Reuven seems to be like the person who says, "I told you so." Why did he have to pour salt on the wounds? Didn't he see how contrite his brothers already were? Did Reuven actually ever tell his brothers not to harm Yosef? All we see from the narrative from last week's portion is that he recommended that they throw him into a pit. Perhaps this is what Reuven was telling his brothers. I wanted to keep him in a pit so that we could all cool off and figure out what to do with Yosef. I knew we were all upset with him, so I suggested we imprison him for a while until cooler minds prevailed. But you, my brothers, couldn't wait it out. Yehuda came up with the idea to sell him as a slave. You should have listened to me instead, been passive, and allowed Yosef to stay where he was. But you had to proactively do something that would either kill him or doom him for the rest of his life. Reuven wasn't chiming in with a simple "I told you so." He was rather chiding his brothers for not expressing their guilt correctly. You only feel bad because Yosef begged us to show him mercy and we callously ignored his cries. But the real reason why we're being punished is because we took action against him. If you want to repent, it's not enough to just express remorse over the fact that we were insensitive to Yosef's cries. Admit that you proactively harmed him by selling him as a slave. And it's at this point, when Yosef hears this exchange between Reuven and the other brothers, that he turns from them and cries. He recognizes the torment that they are experiencing and notes the lingering dissent among them. He realizes that he needs to go through with the masquerade until the brothers unite with a collective recognition of their true guilt. The Torah states that he took Shimon as a prisoner. Why Shimon? Yosef had originally planned to imprison the oldest brother, Reuven. The eldest brother is the most responsible for his siblings, so it made sense for Reuven to be the sacrifice for his younger brothers. But the whole exercise was in order to reenact in front of their eyes the great pain that this separation caused Yosef when he was sold. By expressing guilt over the sale, Reuven already demonstrated his complete contrition and therefore didn't need to partake in this reenactment. Yosef therefore took the next oldest brother, Shimon. We can certainly appreciate how Reuven, as the firstborn, felt most responsible for his younger brothers. As the oldest, he felt it was his duty to protect Yosef and to make sure that his brothers would not behave impetuously. Ever since the advent of modern psychology, psychologists have been debating whether one's birth order in the family can affect their personality. And I quote from an article, "The idea that a person's birth order can influence his or her entire life came from Alfred Adler, an Austrian psychiatrist who lived at the same time as Sigmund Freud. Adler theorized in 1928 that firstborn children are more conservative in the sense of being resistant to change and preferring order and conformity than their younger siblings, because the eldest child has had the experience of being toppled from his or her throne by the sudden arrival of a tiny competitor. In 1997, psychologist Frank Sulloway expanded on the theory and suggested that firstborns are used to being dominant and prefer to uphold the status quo, while secondborns, looking for a unique niche to fill in their families, take a path of rebellion. Firstborns also stick to a conservative path in order to align themselves with their parents. But, Reuven wasn't always so conservative and risk-averse in his choices. We know that after Rachel died, Reuven wanted to be proactive in defending his mother Leah's honor, and so switched his father's bed to his mother's tent. We also know that Yaakov resented Reuven's action for what he deemed to be an act of great disrespect, to the point where on his deathbed, Yaakov criticized Reuven as being impetuous like running water. It may be that Reuven became deflated over this incident. He had tried to please his mother, but in the process insulted his father. This left him with scars that made it difficult for him to act decisively moving forward, which is why we find him acting with great caution at this later stage. Yehuda was different. Not being the firstborn, he wasn't laden with that sense of parental responsibility. He also was not as circumspect when choosing a course of action. He felt more at liberty to take risks, and so he felt it acceptable to recommend that the brothers take action and sell Yosef. He messed up big time, no question. This is why the Torah told us last week that after Yosef's sale, Yehuda separated from the brothers. He felt most responsible for their course of action against Yosef. But what's most noteworthy in looking at the differences between Reuven and Yehuda is the way each of them was affected by their respective mistakes. Reuven, the oldest child, spent the rest of his life paralyzed by fear of making the wrong decision in the future. He committed to the risk-averse and conservative path, realizing how the mistakes of his past wreaked havoc. When he discovered Yosef had been sold, he tore his clothes and cried, "Hayeled einenu," the child is no more. Va'ani, but as far as I'm concerned, ana ani ba, where can I go? I can't move forward. Yehuda, by contrast, did not allow his past mistakes to haunt him or prevent him from moving forward. Instead, he decided to start over and learn from his past mistakes when charting a new course. He left his brothers, started a family, and learned to own up to his mistakes. While Shimon was a prisoner in Egypt, the brothers had returned to Canaan and the famine intensified. An exasperated Yaakov didn't know what to do. How could he part with his beloved baby Binyamin? Both Reuven and Yehuda offered to take responsibility for ensuring Binyamin's safety. Yaakov rejected Reuven, but then finally accepted Yehuda's offer. What was different about Yehuda? Yaakov saw that Reuven had become paralyzed by his guilt. If they would confront an impasse in Egypt, Reuven would take the passive and conservative route. But when you're in the lion's den, you cannot afford to be passive. Yaakov saw in Yehuda not only a leader, but also a person of action. This is the son to whom I can entrust my precious Binyamin, thought Yaakov. There are times in life and in Jewish history when we can afford to take the passive and conservative route, and indeed, it's better to, as they say, err on the side of caution in most situations. But there are also times when being passive simply will not do, and we have to be proactive and decisive. They may end up being the wrong decisions, and we'll need to own up to our mistakes, but better to have lived and erred than to not have lived at all. The Hasmoneans might have chosen a different strategy, one of pacifism and appeasement, but they instead took a decisive course of action against an enemy whom they perceived would not submit to their appeasement. When Neville Chamberlain announced that there would be peace in our time in 1938, many found his encouraging message attractive, but Winston Churchill knew that sometimes the conservative decision wasn't always the right decision, and history has vindicated him. In our own lives, we know of individuals who have allowed their past failures to prevent them from taking ambitious, albeit risky, steps to realize success and their true potential. We know of people who were too afraid to realize their professional and relational potentials and so gave up on their dreams to avoid risking another failure. People have also failed morally or religiously, and instead of owning their mistakes and confronting their flaws with a healthy commitment to improve, gave up on religion entirely. Ultimately, the Yehuda figure, who is prepared to make mistakes, own up to them, and learn from them, is the one who produces the Messiah and a future of perfection and glory. And so, my dear friends, may we merit to follow in Yehuda's footsteps, to be proactive, decisive, and be prepared to make mistakes so that we can see that ultimate redemption. Bimheira b'yameinu, amen. Here's wishing you a beautiful Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov, and Chanukah Sameach.